Mark Andrews finished as the tight end 3 in fantasy points per game, 12.7, which is down 5 points per game from last season. He played in 2 fewer games, 500 fewer receiving yards, 4 fewer touchdowns. But looking at his tight end target share, 29% target share, 29% target rate. He was third among all tight ends in targets, first in route participation, first in tight end air yards, fifth in target quality rating, fourth in red zone targets, fifth in deep targets, fifth in average target distance, second in air yard share among all tight ends, third in tight end receptions, third in receiving yards, second in unrealized air yards. Over 500 unrealized air yards for Mark Andrews. He was getting downfield, and that is clearly the impact of Snoop Huntley on Mark Andrews. He was getting open, but unfortunately was not connecting. And 9 drops also didn't help his production. He was 4th in yards per route run among all tight ends with 2.19. And was given the 3rd most cushion as well. Like, teams were like, sure, you can run some routes, Mark Andrews. Like, fine. Like, your quarterback isn't going to get you the ball anyways. 4th in best ball points added among tight ends, and 4th in total tight end fantasy points. You know, looking at what he did with Lamar Jackson during Lamar's blow-up games. Remember, Lamar had weeks 2 and 3 where Lamar finished with 40 or more fantasy points. Mark Andrews during that time finished with 25 or more fantasy points in those 2 games as well. Hitting on that stack at the beginning of the season was absolute straight cash. But then we fast forward to that Cleveland game, because in week 6, Mark Andrews suffered an injury. Cleveland game, he played 91% of the snaps, 2 targets, only 0.4 fantasy points because he rushed the ball for 4 yards, but then only played 14% of snaps in week 8. And then even coming back in weeks 11, 12, and following, Mark Andrews was extremely disappointing up until week 17 against Pittsburgh, where he finished 9 for 100 on 9 targets, 65 air yards. But just because the targets were there, and just because he was getting a couple receptions, the Ravens were not in scoring position when Lamar Jackson was not on the field. And so the lack of Lamar Jackson moving the ball down the field, and also J.K. Dobbins being gone for a little bit of that as well, severely impacted Mark Andrews and his effectiveness. Plus, Andrews recovering from an injury himself. It was the perfect storm of Andrews to underperform for the second half of the season. So I think Andrews deserves to be in that upper tier. Like, looking at the tight end percentages, Andrews still finished 3rd among all tight ends in rate of achieving top 5 weeks. So it was Kelsey number 1 at almost 60% of the time. Kelsey getting a top 5 tight end week. Kittle was 2 at 33%. And then Mark Andrews was 3rd at 29%. So it was a clear tier difference of Kelsey and then Kittle and Andrews in that very close second tier. And then it's a 3rd tier. Like, Dalton Schultz was 15% of the time being a top 5 tight end, but he was 4th. And his rate was half of that of either Mark Andrews or Kittle's. So Mark Andrews still clearly in that high echelon of tight ends. The question is, what is his value going to be in the 2023 drafts? Is Mark Andrews only getting 12.5 fantasy points or more in a third of games for half PPR scoring, in a third of games during 2022? Is that making him a 4th round pick, a 3rd round pick? I don't think he's a 2nd round pick. I think that would be too much because of how clearly Travis Kelce is a tier above everyone. Like, Kelsey got 12.5 fantasy points about 70% of the time. Like, it was just gross relative to everyone else. So that's what we're looking at when talking about upside. Like, Andrews can access that if Lamar is back. We're talking about one of the most elite tight ends in the NFL still. But is he going to be a 3rd round pick? Is he going to be a 4th round pick? I think I'm in on him as a 4th round pick, but you're missing out on a lot of other upside when you're drafting a 4th round pick with a tight end that doesn't produce for you, half of the time or 2/3 of the time, right? That hit rate is still really bad among tight ends. Yeah, hit rates are pretty disastrous when it comes to trying to get a tight end to get you to 12 and a half fantasy points. It's a hard thing to do.